Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Faisal Khwele. I'm a master's student at the European New School of Digital Studies, and this is the second edition of the podcast I am developing as a part of my master thesis. Today I am joined by Filip Biały, Associate Professor at the European New School of Digital Studies, as well as Adam Mickiewicz University and the University of Manchester. A political theorist by training, but also a web developer, data scientist, and an AI ethicist with a capital E. A man of many talents and even more interests, including being a huge cinephile, which I've had the pleasure to run the ENS Film Club with, and teach a class based on Intermedia Reloaded, Popular Culture, and Digital Capitalism, which we will be presenting at the early SIG 26 conference in Berlin this September. Hello.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here and talk to you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So here today we are talking about a very broad topic in a sense, and it has been the center of many conversations for the past few years, which is AI and creativity, or more or less creativity in the age of AI. So there's a quote by English romantic painter J.M.W. Turner, where he says, "This is the end of art. I am glad I have had my day." He said this in 1839 in one of the first presentations of the daguerreotype, which is one of the first widely available cameras. So certain phrases have been said in terms of certain technologies and developments over the years. Is this the death of art when it comes to generative AI?
I don't think so. I am fascinated with this whole debate, and we spent with students several weeks this term discussing precisely the question of creativity. And we also considered this long history or long debate about how technology may kill creativity, or what is the relationship between arts and technology. And if we are thinking in this sense of long-term debates about art as something that is not just a product or not just expression of human or maybe non-human mind, I think we are missing the point, because creativity is not just about producing something, it is about the process of creation. And if someone would think that because we have now those powerful tools, people will stop being creative, will stop thinking in terms of what can I do to start something new, or maybe what can I do to tell other people what I think about things. This is, I would say, completely impossible. So I wouldn't worry about that, but I appreciate that there are concerns, of course, because there are always concerns. I will give just one other example of a person who was talking about the dangers of technology for creativity or for art in particular. It was famous philosopher Walter Benjamin, one of the main representatives of the Frankfurt School, who published this well-known essay about the work of art in the age of technical reproduction. And he spoke there about the fact that because of now ability to reproduce paintings as pictures and they are not approached, or they are not experienced as they supposed to be experienced. So the effect, the result of the work of art which is reproduced by technology is completely different than the work of art that is experienced in person, so to speak. So there were concerns expressed by very intelligent people, but as we observe today, it did not stop people from being creative.
And well, as you've mentioned, this has been an ongoing conversation, specifically when it comes to different technologies and how they affect creative and artistic processes. And going back to what you said, creativity isn't just about the end product, but also about the actual creative process itself. To stick on the point of the daguerreotype or cameras, more than 200 years old right now, and lots of people considered them that they are the death of painting, because at that time, painting was one of the main objectives was to create as lifelike portraits as possible. And painters needed numerous years, most of their lifetimes, to master these skills and be able to recreate these images. But then came a technology that with a click of a single button can do better than the most trained of artists out there. But in a sense, a lot of people, specifically artists, considered this a type of liberation. That art was, specifically painting here, was governed by a multitude of different philosophies and perspectives, that its objective, its goal was always to recreate that which is living. But then it liberated it with the arrival of the camera. Will we have a similar liberation of different art forms? Will there be new abstractionist, expressionist movements of multiple different art forms with the arrival of AI?
Maybe I will be surprising myself, but I would answer yes. I think that it is a chance with all the criticism, and we will certainly speak about that also, but with all the criticism of AI and its impact on the situation, or just in terms of, well, let's say economy or economic terms on artists, I think that there is a good chance that they will bring something new to the discussion. But on the point that you were making about the fact that photography was considered to be the danger to paintings, there are, as you mentioned, there are multiple ideas of what art should do, what art should be, and the idea that art should imitate life or represent things as they are in nature is very limited understanding, right? So this is one particular approach. And when we think about the different approaches that actually began almost at the same time when the first methods of creating photography or taking pictures were developed, I think in particular about Impressionists or Cubism and the whole abstract art movement. It was back then, as you say, maybe people felt that they don't have to be representing nature, representing reality, and they can be free to do what they think is more interesting. And today we already observe maybe not necessarily yet different currents or types of art, but we may observe development of some strange new things. I will give you just one example, which for me is quite interesting, which is I've been listening lately to a few songs of my favorite artists, in which the voice of the singer was replaced with the voice of another singer from a different band, for example. So you may have, let's say, a song by band Genesis with the voice of David Bowie. And it creates this kind of strange sensation, which is unlike anything else. And you may say, well, of course there were instances in the past when one artist recorded the song of another artist, but this is something different, right? So we did not have this ability to just replace the voice in this manner, which is almost like it is a real thing. It is if it was recorded actually by David Bowie, right? So I would already say that it is a different type of creation, and without AI we couldn't make it as such.
So I do have a few questions on that, and you were talking about a particular kind of feeling, but before we move forward, maybe we should take a step back. And I'm going to ask, like, obviously a very broad and possibly limitless question, maybe you can just dip our feet into it, we try to possibly in one way define what is not creativity or what is not art, and certain aspects of creativity being the process. So we might as well ask, what is creativity, and can our AI be creative?
So my answer would be maybe disappointing, because it would be a bit philosophical, but I cannot help myself in that regard, because I've been thinking about concepts and the way we understand different concepts for a long time, even before my PhD. I was thinking, reading, writing also about defining and understanding political concepts, strictly speaking. Concepts like freedom or equality and so on. And in order to be able to understand what is going on with those concepts, we need to think about the way in which they are being defined and redefined in history. So I wouldn't say that there is some idea of creativity, some concept of creativity that is unchanged. I think that it is historically changing. Every epoch will have a different idea of creativity and what it means to be creative. And what makes the concepts change is, among other things, technology. So with new technology, different methods of doing things are being developed, and therefore also the concept of creativity is being redefined. With the new tools of expression, we may include different forms of creativity, or we may consider different activities as being creative. And another impulse comes from artists, from people who create things on daily basis, and they extend this concept of what it means to be creative. And sometimes they will take a very mundane thing and they will put it in the gallery. We may refer, of course, to the most famous example of Duchamp and the fountain. Put in the gallery, everyday object, and now it becomes a work of art. Or a person going into gallery and just sitting at the table, which is one of the examples that we discussed in our class with Marina Abramovich doing this performance, The Artist is Present. So maybe before that it would not be considered creative, but because it took place in the gallery and it was the artist who did that, we may consider that as expression or as an example of creativity. So I will resist defining creativity, although I know that, of course, we may always find those definitions, and it will be that creativity is to, propose something that is new, maybe propose something that is surprising. And Margaret Bowden would add, she is a great theorist on AI actually, and creativity, adds it is something that has value. And that is interesting aspect. And we wouldn't call something creative to which we cannot assign some type of value. That is also something we discussed in our class. What kinds of values that we have. And of course, the exchange value is only one of them, but something that we may value. And the question is now, going back to your question, whether AI could be creative, it is also the question of value. How do we value the products of AI? If they are valued, well, then maybe they are creative. And if not, because, for example, they are similar to things that we already have seen in the past, maybe we'll still restrict the concept of creativity to just products of human effort.
I think I'm 100% with you on this, that asking if something is creative or not can often be self-defeating, but asking how creativity is defined and redefined through the different contexts in culture, time, and technology. And AI can just be one more step in that, and forcing us to understand how can we be creative and what is creativity overall. And you've mentioned a few elements in when it comes to creativity, one of them the process, other than the ability to surprise. So in a sense, a lot of people, when they think of something creative, they generally correlate newness, novelty, and surprise to it, whether it's a joke or a work of art. And to be honest, this is something that a lot of people felt with generative AI as soon as it hit the market. Seeing things like an astronaut squirrel riding a toad on the moon, on a moon in Saturn, was quite novel at the time. But a few years in, and the internet being filled to the brim with just AI sludge, has gotten to a point where it's not novel anymore. So have we seen all there is to see, or is this just the beginning when it comes to AI art and novelty?
It depends again on our understanding of the role of AI in creative process. If we think, as many people in the industry would like us to think, that AI itself is creating something, then I wouldn't expect something very surprising, because even though we already can see also very famous examples on the internet of different AI models talking to each other and somehow prompting each other to create new things. There is this range of examples, because AI-powered bots basically discuss with each other on social media, and they generate images and so on. So some would say, well, we have this autonomy of those tools, that they create something new. But as you said, I think that we have already seen a lot of what those tools can do on their own. But still, the important part of this process is human prompt, whatever it is. Whether it's a text prompt or someone will input another image or set of images and will ask for some kind of refiguration or configuration of those, the human factor is still there. And it is also again about our understanding of creativity and how we will appreciate, how we will value the result of that. Because process is important, maybe because of slightly different reasons that we may also discuss, but the result will be valued not because of its novelty, or not just because of its novelty, not just because of its surprising factor or surprise factor, but also because of the entity, and I use this vague term with some purpose, behind the creation. So when we think about films that we watch, when we think about music that we listen to, we cannot separate the creation from the artists. Sometimes we can, but in most cases, when we think about our favorite films, favorite songs, and so on, it is always someone responsible for that. And we appreciate the film because it is by our favorite director, and we appreciate the unique vision. We may even see a certain work of camera or a certain type of narrative being used by particular people, and it is very individual. Large language models or generative AI in general may be prompted to behave as an artist, but it will lack individual features of those great artists, human artists, because it will be prompted by a person who is not probably a great artist. If we will have a great artist that will construct a detailed prompt, and create something really new, it will still be that person being the creative force. AI will be just a very powerful, but just a tool. Although I, again, must somehow mention that I also don't think that AI could be defined just as a tool, because it changes, of course, it changes the nature of creative process. So it is not neutral tool like, well, I would say no tool is fully neutral, right? But AI gives you, I would say, more, there is more involved in AI than it is in the paintbrush, right? So in this way, it influences the creative process much more than the paintbrush or a pencil.
This is quite interesting, and like the more aspects of creativity that we discuss, that the more that we find that we also need to address. And you've mentioned multiple aspects about what we value, what we consider valuable, and also value structures. It could be value in the actual process or the actual creation, the end product itself. But a lot of value, we also adhere to our understanding of what can be authentic as well. And this is, I think, also one of the biggest gripes with people, that how authentic is an AI generative creation that was only prompted by one line that took 10 seconds of actual mental labor, if we were to call that labor even. So what do you think about aspects of authenticity and value when it comes to AI?
This is very interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about the idea of authenticity lately, mainly in the context of political communication, which may not seem to be that relevant here, but I will try to justify that. Because when we think about politics, and especially during campaigns, I've been working recently on different elections, and how politicians communicate with prospective voters, we may think about them manufacturing their authenticity in this process. And even if we think about a very simple form of political communication, like election poster, it is always airbrushed. It is always presenting a more perfect or nicer version of the politician. And now, when we have ability to create deepfakes, the question is whether it is the same process of manufacturing something that is authentic, but just different quantity, or is it something of completely different quality? I would say that it is always about creating something that seems to be authentic. And authenticity is frequently, maybe not always, but in many cases in the sphere of art, always manufactured. Just today, I listened to another podcast, not as good as this podcast, but I listened to another podcast when someone was talking about Steve Martin, who is this famous American comedian, actor, also stand-up comedian, who in real life is completely different from his stage persona. Always focused, always working on his bit, always trying to perfect the routine and so on. And what looks like, effortless performance is actually very thoroughly constructed. We have this feeling that we are witnessing someone who is being authentic, but it is actually a construction. So authenticity as such plays a role in art, but I wouldn't say that it is just this spontaneous, just unprepared attempt to create something. Artistic creation always involves a lot of work, and you may ask what authenticity means in this context. You may say, well, authenticity is not in the creative process, or even not in the product of that process, but again in the person who is creating. So if we can sense that the process and the product is informed by someone's actual experience, it somehow connects with us, and somehow we may see that it is constructed, the work of art is always constructed, but actually there is some experience, some idea which is based on what happened to someone. And that is something that I would define as authenticity, which actually is missing from AI, right? Again, you need to have this person who is authentic before you will have AI-created art.
A very interesting aspect of authenticity and how a lot of people understand it is that something is authentic possibly in a sense because it could be unique, or in another sense is that it could be original in how we interpret authenticity in being honesty. And this is also an interesting aspect that a lot of people think simply because of the way AI is. It is models that are trained on ginormous data sets, sometimes in the trillions of points of data sets. And what that simply means is if you were to have a photo generation model, then you'll need to feed it a lot of photos, a lot of pictures, a lot of paintings, and it basically generates based on what it all has already been fed. So it cannot create anything new. So it is always, in a sense, iterative. It is always just creating amalgamations of what it already knows and is unable to create something new. But I think there's also an interesting aspect of it in how much art generally in creation depends on pre-existing creations and works of others. There are entire arguments about that, is that you always need to go back to the masters, and if you were to go back to the masters and ask them who were the masters, you'd end up in basically with the cavemen drawing their hands on the walls of caves. On the other hand, there are entire art forms that are 100% dependent on amalgamations of other arts, basically collage art, montage art, editing, whether that's audio or video, and in music, for example, sampling. Would AI be considered one of those art forms?
I think it is a very loaded question. So you have a lot of assumptions, and I would not necessarily agree, and I know that you not necessarily express your own opinion on that or your own standpoint. But for example, I wouldn't say that authenticity means being unique, because you may argue that the most popular artists, but also some of the most respected artists that are not for everyone, are able to express themselves or their experience in such a way that people will find their own experience in the art, right? So they will say, oh, so the guy is able, or the gal is able to express human condition by telling their own story. So there is this aspect of authentic experience, but it is also this ability to say something universal. So I would say this aspect of universality, which certainly is there in the training data that large language models are, or generative AI are trained on, it is there. So I wouldn't worry that they cannot express those shared experiences of humanity if they are really trained on the content of the internet. They have that. But to present this in this unique way, right? Because that is something that I would agree that it may be universal experience, but it is presented as this unique story. That is more difficult. And it would need, I think, what we already mentioned, a specific prompt. So tell a story, create a picture or a film, because now we are also able to do that, or a piece of music, which would express certain emotion, certain experience, and so on. But for now, those tools, and I think it will change very soon, are still quite difficult to control, so we don't have precise control or on every aspect of their storytelling. We may prompt them and then improve our prompts, but it's a long process, and it is, I think, not, in my case at least, I wouldn't say I would feel very much creative just perfecting my prompt to ask ChatGPT to tell my story. I would rather tell the story myself at this point. Maybe you will reach some stage in which you will be able to do that, but for now I think it is also one of the main limitations of those tools.
But is universality really the primary goal here? Is to create things for the lowest possible denominator that everyone can and should, in a sense, be able to digest and enjoy it? It's like creating sugar, because no human being or almost alive mammal would dislike sugar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It is not universality meant as this is the least common denominator, because it would be creating something that is banal, which is not interesting, and so on. But there must be some connection, I would say, to the human experience, and human experience properly framed, properly expressed, is not banal. It's not something that we find everywhere. So if we ask why people still today read and why people have Shakespeare on stage, right? Why people go to see the plays or see the movies based on those plays? Because Shakespeare, in very strange to our contemporary ear English prose, expressed something that is touching on the human experience, right? And this is what I meant by creating something that is universal, something that speaks, across the different ages. So that would be the goal. If we can impose some goal on creative activity, I wouldn't like to do that. But if we want to speak about examples, that would be example that I would have in mind. Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting that you brought up Shakespeare into this conversation, and in many other conversations about AI, when it comes to bias for and against particular people, possibly minorities, who does it actually represent, and who is often missing from the equation. So yes, one would assume that Shakespeare would play a huge role. I would imagine it is one of the first text points that were trained in a lot of like language models. You have the old analogy of if you had an infinite number of monkeys using typewriters, you'd probably have all of Shakespeare's sonnets. So in this point of creativity and what these AI models can actually generate and be creative, and most probably the data sets that were used, who do you think that they possibly overrepresent and underrepresent?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of my opinion, because there is research on that, and we know that because of the fact that they were trained on the mostly Western English language texts, they are certainly biased towards this part of the globe. So in those terms, I don't have any doubts that they are biased. The question is also, does it translate into what you can do with those tools, right? So whether the fact that they are trained in this biased way would somehow enable you, disable you to make use of them in the way you would like to use them. And I think that is the case. So again, referring to something that we attempted to do during our class, when we used ChatGPT to tell a short story, right? So I'm simplifying the thing that we did, but actually we observed that the structure of the narrative that is produced by ChatGPT is, again, I would use the term banal, something that is just repeating the structure that we have seen multiple times in the past. And you may argue that this structure is, of course, informed by certain culture. It is not universal structure. You may argue that the three-act structure is universal, but it is, of course, informed by particular approach to storytelling. And we may imagine a different form of large language model informed by different type of cultures that would tell, answering the same prompt, completely different story in completely different way. Or if we will train that even on completely different subset of literature, and we will ask, okay, so tell the story but using this genre, it will be completely different. So I would say these models are flexible enough, but still there are some limits to this flexibility in this current stage.
It's a very interesting approach in like what the language models are trained on and what they're not trained on, and it's usually sometimes there are very specific choices and very deliberate and intentional with particular goals behind them. So scholar and rapper Inungo Lumumba Kasongo, who goes by the rapper name Samus, based on the Nintendo video game character, has written on the topic of rap and AI. Rap as an art form has lyrical ingenuity as its backbone, being one of the most difficult aspects to master. But due to it being very text-rich, has also made it very susceptible to be extracted, mined, and synthesized. On the other hand, it has been one of the first art forms to be demonstrated using generative AI, letting it a cool aspect borrowed from the lives and personas of rappers, who are often African Americans, which is highly contrasted with the often uncool lives of the AI model creators. So when it comes to AI and creativity, who are the most vulnerable to being exploited and who are at most risk in being replaced also?
Well, the answer is always the most vulnerable are those who are already in the situation of being oppressed in contemporary society. And here, risking that I will sound like Karl Marx, it is always the economic structure that dictates who will benefit from the new way of technology. Unfortunately, because we hear the promise every time something new is coming. It was like that with the advent of the internet. It will be this equalizer, and everyone can be now a producer of the content with Web 2.0. And strangely enough, we have big corporations behind the creators. Even if we may think that the independent YouTubers are just independent, they are, of course, somehow prisoners, so to speak, of the algorithm of YouTube and certain requirements that are not always explicit. But in terms of who will be replaced, well, I don't think that anyone could feel safe here. And we already see that people who sometimes spend decades perfecting their skills, being like visual artists or graphic artists, are already replaced. And I remember from 2 years ago a conversation that was, I think, even before ChatGPT and before DALL-E, or maybe DALL-E was introduced first, then when I spoke with some colleague and who said that, well, one of the well-known Polish science fiction writers is publishing a new novel, and the publisher decided to use AI-generated picture. So, of course, there are people who are now being replaced as we speak. But in the long run, I would argue it will have even worse effect on people who have some artistic, creative ambitions, but they will be discouraged by the fact that they will see people claiming that AI can do all those things, so why would you bother going to art school? And it is, for me, quite depressing if I would think that we will lose some interesting new developments in the arts because some people will be discouraged to do that. And we hear about people like, I think it was one of the TV executives, correct me if I'm wrong, if you will be able to remember the story, who decided against hiring people to work for him because now he can use video generation from AI to replace those creative people. So there are people who are losing jobs as we speak. And it has this economic effect. And I can imagine that even if they will face, I mean, big studios and big technological companies will face some resistance. Extras in films already are replaced by AI. So there are people affected by that. I would still want to believe, though, that it will not diminish human creativity, understood not as the process which should end with some economic profit, but something that is, again, I'm resisting a bit this concept, essentially human. So we want to do creative things, and we will keep doing them, but the question whether we will be able to pay our rent with that remains, right? I will give you just one example of the thing that I've been trying to do lately, having no time, of course, for that, but I've been trying to learn how to do animation. Just frame by frame animation, very simple thing, which I now have software for. And I know that I could use generative AI to do this for me, but the whole idea that I can teach myself doing that and the amount of pleasure it gives me is something that I couldn't buy. But it is, of course, luxury to think about creativity in those terms, because there are people whose livelihoods depends on being able to sell the products of their creativity, and they will be affected.
I think it's also considering some of the biggest outcries that we've seen since the start of generative AI, whether in creative fields or otherwise, it's that there was a lot of concern because of who it actually affected. I am fully on board with what you said, based on that it'll mostly affect the people who are generally affected by anything new. Like people from poor backgrounds, queer people, people of color, women generally. But most of the outcry that we've heard are actually white-collar, middle-class workers, such as copywriters, graphic designers, translators, and the like.
I think those people, well, of course, they have this power to communicate this content, right? So they are visible and well, and of course I may say that I somehow feel for them, but I don't think that they would be in the long run the most affected. So I would add to what I just said that people who have those skills, those creative skills, will still be able to somehow find their place, whether we are talking about being creative or in terms of job market. But the most important part are those people who cannot express the fact that they are affected, not just by the creative side of AI, but by technological change in general. And I agree that the different identities that you mentioned make people worse off even without AI, and now with AI their struggle will be even worse. There are, of course, other things that we may think of when we speak about the effects of AI on creativity, but also more broadly speaking about culture. And of course those minority cultures, those minority languages that are being displaced, and how the AI is also now considered to be the model of the, and I please forgive me the pun, the model of language, not just language model, but also a model, the normative model, how we should speak. And I spoke about that particular problem with academic teachers from the languages department, how they struggle to find solution for the situation in which they try to teach students how to write properly, for example, in English, and those students will use ChatGPT to correct their homework, their essays, and so on. So one problem is, of course, that you need to be more creative in how you will teach those skills, but another problem is that those students will learn how English language should look like from ChatGPT. So it will impose certain language norm on people, which is, for example, if you are from even English-speaking country, but not the US or the UK, which is already a problem because you are being forced to adhere to certain norm that is not yours. So these are the problems that are aside from the struggle of the creative industry, so to speak.
I would imagine it will be labeled something such as generative AI code switching, where a person would have to change not necessarily just language, but also accent and possibly dialect to fit in better in a particular society, community, or job. And I guess when it comes specifically to creative industries, if you were interested in literary creation, if you were to write, with AI tools, it'll keep nudging you into speaking in a particular way.
So that is the problem, because in very practical terms, not just creativity and not just the problem of creativity is maybe the most important aspect of that. But if you have job interviews by AI and you are being assessed not just on the merits of your skills or experience, but also how do you speak and what is your accent and so on, because you need to adhere to this norm imposed by the AI tool. It is already causing exclusion and I would say oppression. But I think there is something else that we could speak about here, which is basically the fact that displacement or replacement that is going on is not properly governed by, for example, those big platforms like YouTube. So we now have YouTube channels which are filled with AI created, with AI generated content. And when we speak about people who are being displaced, those independent creators who had to fight the algorithm for a long time now are being displaced by people who will use streamlined process of creating content for YouTube and monetizing this content. Of course, the amount of time YouTube users can spend on YouTube is limited, and if the more and more of this amount is taken by people who create content using AI, it means that the people who are real creators will lose this fight, because those generated this generated content will be better and better. I don't know whether there is research now. What is the amount of the content that is produced right now in this way? But I observe people really following those channels, and I don't know how to explain that. But I would say that is one of the main concerns that I would mention in this context.
It's also nearly impossible to have any kind of discussion about anything living in a capitalistic world without reducing it to actual value as well as supply and demand. Well, I fully agree with you. Spending half of your lifetime fighting against algorithms and big platforms with rules of monetization that change almost daily and are indecipherable. You really cannot understand what the algorithm wants from you to make the most money that you can, so it just ends up being a guessing game. But on the other hand, there's a counter argument to that, to being simply replaced by massive AI generation channels or accounts on TikTok and Instagram and the like, of, well, simply supply and demand. If there is a lot of supply for AI generated nonsense or sludge, then there may not be a lot of demand for it, and demand for actual, authentic, creative, however you may define it, human-generated content would also rise.
Well, but this is the old argument that the things that are really valuable in the long run prevail, or will in the long run prevail. Not to repeat the slogan that in the long run we will all be dead. It may actually take some time. If we believe in this, let's say, almost nature-like law of economy, that there will be this moment in which the market will decide what is valuable or not. I don't believe that market can decide, and that is also because people who are now watching the content generated by AI or by people who use AI to generate the content will acquire a certain taste for a certain type of content, and they will maybe react differently to the content generated by human beings. I can imagine that in a few years we will have a lot of people who will be saying, I prefer AI generated music over, let's say, Bob Dylan. Right? It speaks to me because I'm used to it, because our sense of what is what we like is, I would say, quite flexible, and just like we got used to certain type of popular culture that is not of very high value, and millions of people will watch. I'm sorry if I will now say something offensive. Millions of people watch reality TV. Right, and frequently it is, as you said before, the least common denominator, and people earn money producing this kind of, again, sorry for the expression, trash. The same could happen with AI generated content on the internet. So I would still worry about the result or the effect of that process.
And it's funny that you mentioned Bob Dylan specifically. I don't know if we're ever going to have an AI model not being able to also accept a Nobel Prize in literature. But considering that Bob Dylan was one of the biggest counterculture and protest anthem songwriters to have ever existed, basically building an entire career on political creativity. And that in itself is also another ginormous aspect of creativity. And how can creativity and how is creativity political?
The idea of people who are creative being also countercultural is, as many of those ideas that we have discussed, it's been there for a long time, right? So we may think that some of those groundbreaking artists like Bob Dylan, but also the Beatles, were not just creative, but they were also able to go against their times. So the surprise and the novelty in these cases was to do something else. And in itself, it could be considered a political act, because you are going against societal norms in one way or another. But there is also another type of argument that I would say is equally interesting, which would be to actually think about politics as this sphere of creativity. Because when we think about what creativity means. It is introducing something to the world and as a result maybe changing the world. And who has this power to change the world? Maybe people who are engaged in politics, people who are introducing new laws and new regulation and imposing their ideologies on reality and so on. So politics in some political thought, political theory, I would like to mention Hannah Arendt in this context. Some would say politics is the sphere of actual creativity because you are creating this new world for other people to live in. And that would be the considered as the ultimate creative act. But even if we think about artists who were political, just by being engaged in politics, I wouldn't say that it is possible for you to become this icon like Bob Dylan. I think that there is also the other aspect of what we already discussed under the label of authenticity, but also ability to translate your own experience into something that sounds more universal or touches on this human condition, whatever. But it is more complex than that. But I would say politics might be one of the most important aspects of creativity, for sure.
And it's very interesting in how creativity correlates with politics, but also begs to ask the question, can you be politically creative using tools that were designed and proliferated by gigantic corporations, specifically tech companies? So in the way that a lot of AI works, it is very much defined by its own limitations, and these limitations are very intentional. If any of you remember some of the earliest AI chatbots, specifically the one made by Microsoft, put up on Twitter, taken down off of Twitter in less than 17 hours because it was simply far too racist and offensive. So designing guardrails and limitations is a core aspect of generative AI. To not create any kind of racist, homophobic, offensive, pornographic, or criminal content, in a sense. But also, on the other hand, any kind of content that needs to be generated by these models has a profit mentality in it. It needs to maximize profit for the companies that actually design it and sell it. So can one actually be able to use these tools with so many guardrails, with so many limitations built in to not create anything that might be controversial or might be able to make people think?
The short answer is, I think you could use those tools for being a revolutionary. But I also agree that because of those limitations, you would need to maybe work harder with those tools to have this kind of result. But I think the question is much broader, because we may always argue that there is some intended use of any tool, any technology. But there are always people who find another way of using those tools for different purposes. And it is like with everything that you will create. You may have some intention behind your creation and it would be interpreted differently. And with those tools, the intended purpose is, of course, to make profit for the corporations. And of course, they will try to limit the way in which people may use those tools for doing sometimes just bad things. Like there are attempts by companies like OpenAI, for example, to limit the use of their products for disinformation or for creation of some other dangerous, labeled as dangerous content. And in many cases, it is something that is and maybe should be accepted. So they are doing things that maybe are for the benefit of society. But of course, there is this another aspect that you mentioned, which is that it may also limit our ability to generate something that would have this revolutionary effect, or could be used for creating something that would have this kind of aspect. But that is only if we are talking about using one tool to do very simple things. So if we would like to use ChatGPT to create an anti-capitalist manifesto, it would give it to us. But it doesn't matter whether we'll get that result if we cannot communicate it properly. So I think that the limitation is not in the tool or in those tools, but it is a broader set of norms that prevent us from expressing revolutionary ideas. Because I don't think that we suffer from the lack of such new ideas that may be also considered dangerous. But what is limiting is not technology necessarily, although it is a part of it, but it is the strength of the ideology which make people unwilling to listen to something that is new and different. And that is powerful force which maybe could be somehow confronted with technology, maybe not the technology created by the big tech companies. So maybe in a way, in the end, I would agree with you, but I still don't think that the technology is the main issue if we are talking about challenging, for example, inequalities or challenging oppression. Technology could be, in principle, used to challenge those issues. And the limitations are there, but this is not my main worry, I think.
My final question for today is about imaginaries, and I cannot think of a single sci-fi movie that involved artificial intelligence in the past, 100 years, where the imagination was AI is going to steal our creative abilities. It's going to write all of our music, make all of our paintings. And there was a very famous tweet by Polish author Joanna Maciejewska, which was, quote, "I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes." Is this really the future that we imagine? Is this the future that we asked for?
So we are going back now to the question about the distribution of the benefits of new technology, and that is my real concern. Because we may use those tools to write those anti-capitalist manifestos, but the problem is that it will not change the main problem, which is the system which is already there in place, and it is it has so much power over our world. It is embedded into institutions. It has this, as Slavoj Žižek would say, this material force. It is present in our everyday life, and what we can do in this situation? Well, did I understand you correctly that you said that there were no science fiction narratives that would say something about AI stealing our creative power?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, at least.
Yeah, so I would actually give you a counterexample, which we discussed with students this term, from the Polish writer Stanisław Lem, who wrote a number of short stories about machines and robots and we would say AIs. And in one of his stories, an inventor constructs a machine that can write poetry. And the machine is trained. There is this whole passage in the short story about how the machine is trained. And the machine is trained by not being fed with the data as we would think of, like text data, but it is actually teaching itself by recreating the whole process of human civilization, how humanity came into existence. And because poetry is expression of human existence, it must understand the whole evolution and how we came into being. And then it is able to write poetry which is better than the poetry written by actual human poets. And it actually ends with poets protesting against the machine, and the inventor, the constructor of this machine, decides to destroy it. But when he approaches the machine starts to produce so moving poetry that he's stopped and he's unable to destroy it. And the story, if I remember correctly, ends with the machine being sent into outer space, and it finds its way to take control over some planetary system, and its creativity is expressed by moving those suns and stars and planets around. And this is a new way of being creative. But the inventor, that is the last part, I think, of the story, promised that he will never attempt again to create a poetry writing machine. So there are precedents, and there are people who are trying to predict what would happen with us if we would be confronted with something that is better at being creative. But I agree with the quote, of course, because I would also like to have more time to be creative. But the problem with AI today, with those tools that we have, is that it automates our everyday tasks, but we are not then free to do more meaningful stuff, but we have more time to do more work. So if I can finish my task in my work faster, it means that I will receive another task, and it will never end if we will not change the structure of what is going on in economy and in society. So the tools on their own will not make our lives better. It must be something else that will change, and here this revolutionary idea that we need to change the economic and also political system to make it better for us.
I think that was a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Filip. And I would like to ask you of any recent developments and things that you're working on. Where can people get a hold of you or listen to you speak in the future?
Well, thank you so much for this discussion. This is a fascinating subject, and I feel that we could talk for much longer. I am currently engaged in multiple different research projects. I mentioned that I work on the political implications of digitalization, especially during elections. I work in the team at the University of Manchester, focusing on different elections, and currently we are working on the British general election, and we will move on to looking at the US presidential election this year. And it is fascinating because we may also sometimes find out that many of worries that are expressed today, like the fact that we will now face this automated disinformation, or the deep fakes will have this enormous impact on elections, and we read about this stuff every day, are rather unfounded. So I am surprised, maybe even to some degree, that that politics is one of the spheres of human activity that is maybe least vulnerable, actually, to the technology. So technology is still not able to change the way in which politics is being conducted, and still it is a contest of personalities and people who represent certain ideas, and with all the help from AI and deepfakes, it is not easily changed, the situation. So I will be focusing on that for the next year, probably, and I will be talking in multiple places about it, including ENS, hopefully. So I hope to meet many people here at ENS.
Thank you so much. And word of advice is to follow Filip Biały on LinkedIn, not necessarily for his numerous work updates, but to reiterate the point of authenticity, actual authentic content, usually pretty cynical in a sea of nonsensical, overly positive LinkedIn content.
Thank you so much for the plug.
Thank you so much. This has been Faisal Khouele, and thank you for listening.